talking about heart whispering. There we go. If you look in the Bible at spiritually influential individuals, let's look at 3 of them. And you see if you see what I see. Here with Moses, it says, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. I think you'd agree with me that as it relates to spiritual influence, Moses was spiritually influential. Actually, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Nobody was more spiritually influential than Jesus was. And it says this is what he was like. In terms of progression, Paul came after Jesus, was not more influential, but in terms of chronology, it says about Paul, by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you, I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold when away. What do you see? What is the common denominator between Moses and Jesus and Paul? Their spiritual influence was gentle. I think that tells us a lot then. God designed spiritual influence to be gentle. And you say, why? Well, this is what Jesus, Paul, and Moses were like. Gentle spiritual influence strikes at the root of the problem. There's one quote that I like, I quote often. Here's what it says. For every 1,000 people whacking away at the leaves of evil, there's one person striking at the root. And as we've been saying relative to heart whispering, is that heartache is at the root of the problem. If you would put your finger on the pulse of where things are generated and where things rise up from relative to the problems that we have, either with morality or emotional anger, whatever it is, it rises, I believe, from heartache. Heartache is at the root of the problem. And the fact is that heartache happens to all of us. We described a scene trying to figure out what heartache is like and where it comes from. An infant wakes up hungry. Hunger is an alarm that God gives us to let us know that there is a need that we cannot ignore. The infant makes the need known by crying. If crying is met by a timely response, this is what happens. The hunger stops, the crying stops, and the need is met. That's if it's met with a timely response. Those of you who are moms and dads, you understand what will happen if the need is not met with a timely response. The hunger doesn't stop, the crying doesn't stop, and something else begins. Heartache begins. What began as a physical need now becomes an emotional need. What began as a matter of the stomach now becomes a matter of the heart. If food is offered, the infant either doesn't feed or feeds fitfully. If the infant has been crying for a period of time and you offer the infant a bottle, the infant won't take the bottle right away because it has progressed from being a physical need to an emotional one. There is anger and fear on behalf of the infant. And before the stomach need can be attended to, the heart need must be addressed. How do you deal with the heart need? Naturally, you don't yell. You don't say, but I've always been there for you. Gentle whispering deals with the heart need. Shh. It's okay. And the soft talk, whispering, heart whispering, attends to the emotional need. And once the emotional need is gratified, then the infant feeds fully and not fitfully. The infant grows up. We develop different needs and different signals, but one thing remains the same, I would say. One thing remains the same, and that is that when the need goes unmet, another need is created. When we have chronic, acute, inflamed needs, things that we really want, and those needs go unmet, It's not just a matter of wanting what we want. What happens is that an emotional need is created. We find ourselves wondering, doesn't anybody care about me? Now, whether you're conscious of this voice or not, this is what we have in common with infants, that hunger, if untended, promotes heartache. What began as a physical need, a need for this or that, becomes an emotional need. Heartache. We don't recognize the need as heartache, and what we think is that it's just about needing more. And JC's, come on up, JC. The human response to heartache is, I just need more money. Or I just need more friends. And neither of those is sufficient to meet what has become the core need.
Good morning. If you look in your handout, insert, I'm going to read you the verse. Mike, we're in Mike's key verse is a Matthew, and then he'll move to Hebrews 13. And I have a couple different verses, but the door opener reads like this. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed should be kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, right? So I want to talk about, and I give you some spots. I'm going to ask you to write some things down. I want to talk about the human response to heartache. What we do naturally when things don't go the way we want them to go, or when we have in our lives those things we don't want. But I was looking for an illustration to just bring it home, and I found something in a book, in a description of stories from the Chicago Tribune. Monday, August 26th, tragedy struck Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Fort Lauderdale family. 2 boys found their 12-year-old brother, Samuel, dead in the yard. He had hung himself from a tree. Beneath the tree was a step stool and a flashlight. There was little mystery about what had provoked Samuel to end his life. Samuel had a weight problem, and this would have been the first day at his new school. He had told his family that he was nervous about going to school because he was afraid of the teasing that would likely come from other children. We look at this and we look at how we handle heartache. We look at the life of Samuel. This 12-year-old kid did what we all do. He faces heartache, or the prospect of heartache, and takes matters into his own hands. For Samuel, death was the sweet solution to heartache, to the problem of being ridiculed and shamed at the hands of his peers. What I know is that Samuel absolutely did not want to deal with friends who would tease him or persecute him or harass him. I also know this: pleasure always is looked at in the contrast. It's always contrast. Heartache is always contrasted with pleasure, right? And we've defined heartache as being left alone with unmet needs. Think about some of the things. I sit with families every day and I listen to the unmet needs of finances, the unmet needs of relationships, the unmet needs of shelter, clothing, the unmet needs of being stimulated or having a passion. Heartache is defined as unmet needs or fear. and feeling alone in that. Pleasure, I would contend, is defined as having what I want. Having what I want. And not having what I don't want. That makes sense? Pleasure has a formula. I have to have what I want. And the pinnacle of pleasure is to have what I want and to not have what I don't want. To have family and to not have anyone sick. To have a job in this economy and not have the threat of being laid off. To have a wife or a husband and to not deal with the threat of betrayal. To have best friends at school and to not have them gossip about me. We look at Titus 3. Paul in Titus 3 gives us a little bit more. He says, just to understand the natural response. He says, at one time, we too were foolish, disobedient, and deceived, and enslaved to all kinds of passions and pleasure. Right? What Titus is telling us, Paul's telling us in the letter of Titus, is three things. Paul's saying when faced with heartache, we got to deal with three things. First thing is, heartache comes and we get deceived. The word deceived there means that I have a choice to choose a perspective and I get tricked by my desire to believe a worldly truth or a selfish truth or my own understanding. And I choose that over against God's perspective. I think about the garden. God laid it out. He created creation to be specifically suited for Adam and Eve. And then he laid out the boundaries. You can do this. You can do all this. Don't do this. And Satan just asked the question. Did he really say don't eat? And that tipped it. So Titus says deception. Now deception then leads to foolishness. And the word there, Hebrew there, the Greek there, I want to give you the picture. Let me show you the picture. Can you see that? I can only hold this for a little while. Foolishness is obstinance. It's stubbornness. It's my refusal to believe anything but my perspective. I dig my heels in as it relates to how I see things, according to my understanding. For Samuel, let's go back to that story. He was deceived. He thought he was alone. And then he got stubborn. And he really believed, not only am I alone, but he believed it was impossible to face that new school day. And when you do that, you add deception with foolishness, you get disobedience. The decision I make to take matters into my own hands. We reject God's perspective and we determine a path based on our own understanding. James 4. Now, let me go back. In that first slide underneath there, write Titus 3:3. So you know where I got this stuff from. Titus 3:3a. In the second slide, write James 4:2a. James 4:2a. I'm going to read it to you. I'll read James 4:1 and 2. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something, but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you can't have what you want. You quarrel and fight, and you don't have because you don't ask God. James summarizes heartache, and he says it simply. Heartache, unmet needs, and fear drives us to scheme, calculate in my head, and kill. The second part of Titus tells us that if we live in heartache, we live from this perspective, Our lives are full of malice and envy. Let me handle those in reverse. Envy looks like this. I'm not getting what I want. So I start looking at you, and what you smiling about? Huh? What you smiling about over there? Life ain't good. And I look, and because I'm looking around, I don't look up. And when I don't look up, I'm discontent and I'm restless. That's the meaning of envy. The meaning of malice, then, is because I don't have what I want and I've let go of God's perspective and I have in my life what I don't want, I turn people into things. I turn relationships into things. Everything's an object. And what Titus and James says, malice means that I do harm. I'm willing to do harm to get what I want. Now, harm you. I never killed anybody. But I have borrowed some pens and I have walked away and I have overlooked this, and I kind of get a little attitude when you don't tell me yes when I want to hear yes, honey. And those are the same thing. I'm willing to kill to get what I want. Now, James says this too, that it's our passion, our lust that drives that. And when we are driven by passion and lust, desire, craving, we end up hating. And when we give hate, hate finds its way back around in the form of quarrels and fight. Now let me define quarrels and fights. James says we are prone to quarrel and fight. Okay? Fights have to do with big stuff like Democrats versus Republicans, or Baptists versus Catholic, or charismatic versus conservative. Community fights. And there was fights going on in the church. But quarrels have to do with my daughter's not doing what I want. Her dad ain't doing what she wants. My boss treats me like. It has to do with those petty desires and fights I have with people, but also with me. You know what, man? This is the 16th time I have yelled at my daughter. This is the 32nd time. I cannot be patient. I'm praying for patience. Quarrels internally. So the human response then, like Samuel, the human response is when I don't have what I want to control. And when I want to control, I'm willing to cage you or punish you. Samuel felt caged by his weight and the possibility of being ridiculed, and having pain created by harassment from his peers. So his solution, like ours, is something or someone's got to die. When heartache strikes and we leave ourselves in the hands of our own minds, when unmet needs and fear screams, we scream back harshly. And that's the human solution.
The divine response to heartache. Let's pick up the next half of the verse that JC began with. It says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, and now here we have God's response, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? It says two things there. Number one, it says, never will I leave you. And in terms of what it means to leave, let me show you another verse that describes the same word. It's the one that's underlined. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders to leave is the same word. It has the sense to untie. And I think that never will I leave you, we might define it this way. I will not let go of the rope. I will not let go of the rope. That rope is attached to you. And you're going to wade into things that are scary, places that you're not sure you'll be able to succeed. Things might happen that would be harmful in that place. And what God says, not in saying, never will I leave you, He says, I will not let go of the rope. You will not be in there alone and untended. I have the other end. That's what it means. You might have heard this story about a man who let go of a rope. I've read it before. It's kind of funny. He writes in response to the request for additional information in block number 3 of the accident reporting form. He says, I put poor planning as the cause of my accident. You said in your letter that I should explain more fully, and I trust that the following details will be sufficient. I'm an amateur radio operator, and on the day of the accident, I was working alone on the top section of my new 80-foot tower. When I had completed my work, I discovered that I had, over the course of several trips up the tower, brought up about 300 pounds of tools and spare hardware. Rather than carry the now unneeded tools and materials down by hand, I decided to lower the items down in a small barrel by using a pulley which was fortunately attached to the pole at the top of the tower. Securing the rope at ground level, I went to the top of the tower, loaded the tools and material into the barrel. Then I went back to the ground and untied the rope, holding it tightly to ensure a slow descent of the 300 pounds of tools. You will note in block number 11 of the accident reporting form that I weigh only 155 pounds. Due to my surprise of being jerked off the ground so suddenly, I lost my presence of mind. This is a story, by the way. Not true. I lost my presence of mind, forgot to let go of the rope. Needless to say, I proceeded at a rather rapid rate of speed up the side of the tower, in the vicinity of the 40-foot level. I met the barrel coming down. This explains my fractured skull and broken collarbone. Slowed only slightly, I continued my rapid ascent, not stopping until the fingers of my right hand were 2 knuckles deep into the pulley. Fortunately, by this time, I had regained my presence of mind and was able to hold on to the rope in spite of my pain. At approximately the same time, however, the barrel of tools hit the ground and the bottom fell out of the barrel. Devoid of the weight of the tools, the barrel now weighed approximately 20 pounds. I refer you again to my weight in block number 11. As you might imagine, I began a rapid descent down the side of the tower. In the vicinity of the 40-foot level, I met the barrel coming up. This accounts for the 2 fractured ankles and the laceration of my legs and lower body. The encounter with the barrel slowed me enough to lessen my injuries when I fell onto a pile of tools, and fortunately, only 3 vertebrae were cracked. I'm sorry to report, however, that as I lay there on the tools in pain, unable to stand and watching the empty barrel 80 feet above me, I again lost my presence of mind. I let go of the rope. That's what God says in terms of never will I leave you. He said, never will I let go of the rope. He says, never will I forsake you. And in terms of the word forsake, here's a verse that uses it. Paul describes a person named Demas. He is in Rome at the time and is under house arrest. He needs every friend he can get. This is what he says. Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me. There's the word. And has gone to Thessalonica. I think we could put it this way then. Paul said Demas left him behind. Whereas Paul wanted someone to accompany him, Demas did not. And for when it says, never will I forsake you, it means never will I leave you behind. So what God says, never will I let go of the rope, never will I leave you behind. Do we have anybody here who is presently or in the past has served in the Marine Corps? Any Marines? You're a Marine, and even if you're not, you'll understand this. Semper Fi. Is that right? Semper Fi. What it means, Semper Fidelis. And the word is all, and Fidelis has a sense of fidelity. Fidelity is continuing faithfulness to an obligation or duty. So Semper Fidelis, shortened into Semper Fi, means always faithful. And to a Marine, when they are on a mission, this is what it means: never leave a fellow soldier behind. Semper Fi. And what they know is that if they go in to engage the enemy and somebody is restrained or captured, the code of the Marine Corps is Semper Fidelis, Semper Fi. Never leave someone behind. When we get to Hebrews 13:5, it says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you, never will I let go of the rope, never will I leave you behind. Those words can apply to a baby's room. Never will I forsake you, never will I leave you. They can also apply to a battlefield. When he says these, never will I leave you or never will I forsake you, it's not really a soft expression of care. If you look really at what it's saying, it's not a soft, tender, never will. Now, we can interpret it that way. What this is a firm expression of commitment. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. And when a Marine says this, they don't have to scream it. They don't have to shout it at the top of their lungs. In fact, if you were to hear it, I think you'd probably hear it this way. Somebody is going to engage in battle. It's going to be dicey. And what they would say to one another, and they wouldn't need to shout, they would say, I just want you to know, Semper Fi. Semper Fi. Because it's not about emotion. It's about, if you get taken, I am coming in after you. And the ability to say it gently, it's not because there's not passion. It's because it's a description of commitment. It's firm and it's hard. And if you then engage the enemy and are restrained by them, you know what would go on in your mind through those long days? There'd be a word that would go through your mind. Do you know what it would be? Semper Fi. Semper Fi. They will be faithful. They will not leave me behind. They will not let go of the rope. God's love is active. God's love is faithful and firm. It's not just soft. It's not, oh, you're the apple of God's eye. You know, I don't find that here. What I find here, God says to you, I will never let go of the rope. And He doesn't scream it and shout it. He doesn't cry, because it's a commitment. And what He says to you, I will never leave you behind. I don't care where you go. I don't care what happens. I don't care who deserts you. I don't care if money leaves you. I don't care if companions leave you. I will never leave you. That's what He says. The divine response to heartache, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. I think that sums it up. Semper Fi. That's what God says. Either way, whether it's comfort to an infant or encouragement to a comrade in arms, gentleness gets to the root of the matter. Gentleness is powerful because it gets to the root of the matter. Gentleness is powerful because it changes the heart. Chase, come on up. In terms of heart whispering, I think that's what God would say. And again, it's appropriate at a number of different levels. I don't know where you are. I know that, like all of us, you're exposed to things that feel like inflamed needs, and it makes you feel at some level that you've been abandoned. You have things you don't want, and you don't have things you do want. And you wonder, this person beside me that I thought loved me, why aren't they giving me what I want? It makes you feel abandoned. And here's what God would say to you. people don't love perfectly. I do. And my love for you is not soft. It's firm and committed. I will not let go of your rope. I will not. I will not. And he doesn't have to shout. I will not leave you behind. Semper Fi. Jay?
I think about the notion that God will never leave you and never forsake you. And I think about what I see every day is that as times get hard, as times gets difficult, people start to find out that finances don't secure. People don't buy that. They're starting to see this is flimsy. They also start to find out, which I think is harder, people then tend to look to relationships. And people in my office are struggling because that's not working. And what I'm seeing now in this time is that people are beginning to look upward again because the finances aren't holding up. And we love conditionally and imperfectly. And He holds. And He loves us perfectly. And He's there when we're in pain. He's there when we don't have. He's there when we do have. And so you think about heart whispering as opposed to screaming. God speaks gently and firmly to you. Yesterday we were at a game and I heard a girl sat down on the bench and she was complaining about the ref, and the coach, who's trying to gel this team together, says to her, "Shut up." And she said it to her firmly, not loud. "Shut up. Stay focused." And I went to her afterwards. I said, "What was you yicking at her about?" She said she was complaining about the ref and complaining, and she was complaining so much it took her out of the game. I needed to get her focused. But she was there for her. And God speaks gently to me and you in our need and in our plenty.
Worship team's going to come up. Come on, they do a closing song. When you put your finger at what would you need in order to be the person that God would more want you to be? You say, "You know what, Mike, I really need to bring my morality in line." Okay, I buy that. I need to be less greedy. I need to be less angry. I need to be less hostile. And in terms of finding a way to be able to be that person, what God would say, I think, and what He brings in order to influence you in that direction is surprising. You would think, many of you, that you need to be screamed at, and you scream at yourself. "Look at you! Look at what you're doing!" Screaming is ineffective. Screaming won't change your heart. When God changes somebody's life, He doesn't scream. Moses didn't scream. Neither did Jesus, and neither did Paul. Why? Because heart whispering gets to the root of the matter. You don't want to be alone. You know that about you? You're like me. You don't want to be alone. And when you don't have what you want, it makes you feel alone. What I'd encourage you to do, create a larger capacity to hear what God is saying to you. And here's what God says to you. I will not leave you. I will not let go of the rope, and I will not leave you behind. I don't care where you go. Semper Fi. I think that's what he'd say. Close in prayer, a couple of opportunities to increase your capacity to understand God's commitments to you. This Wednesday night, 7, 8:30. That's what we're going to do. 10 Commitments Bible Study. Look at passages that talk about His commitments. Next Sunday, 9 o'clock, right here in the conference room, Randy will facilitate that discussion, looking at passages that will reinforce your ability to know and put your confidence in what God says to you, and that will transform your life. Let me pray. Father, I want to thank You for Your commitments to us. They aren't soft and sentimental. They are rooted in a rock-hard commitment. And Jesus, You demonstrate that. You came to do a rescue mission. We were in enemy territory. You crossed the lines. You experienced pain because You will not leave people You care for behind. I pray that you would give us an increasing ability to focus on that when our needs inside scream at us and we feel like we're going nuts. Give us the perception to understand that at some level we want what we want because we don't want to be alone. And I pray that you would help us to deal with the heart thing. And you would whisper gently, firmly, not sentimentally, but with commitment. Thank you for your commitments to us. In Jesus' name, amen.